Today we're going to take a little tour of my bookshelves. Hey y'all, welcome back to Dots and Beyond. My name is Beth, and today we are going to take a quick peek at my bookshelves. Now, I have moved my bookshelves into my bedroom. My son Kenny, most of you know due to his bullet journal, moved home from Colorado during the pandemic, and he is still here, and that's fine. I used to have an office and study set up in the room that he's sleeping in. Everything's been relocated to my bedroom. I have this weird corner as you come in the door. My door is right there coming in. So my bookshelves are wrapped around this corner. I have wanted to replace these black bookshelves for years. It's on my to-do list for this year. I just haven't gotten around to it, and they're just so deep and dark, and I do want to change that. Now, I have moved enough in recent years that I've done some purging. And then, of course, my children are grown now, and so there's a lot of the series that were YA that we read together, or younger, like Fablehaven. We've donated a lot of books. All of that has kind of gone away from my shelves, and this is what's left. This is what I've got. Most of what is here I either love or I haven't read it yet. That's what we've come down to. It's either on my TBR or it's a book that I love simply because of space. Every time I move, the movers will ask me if I'm a teacher because I have so many books. And this, by some standards, this is not a terrible amount of books. So we're going to go ahead and start in this corner over here. I do have additional lighting set up in my room. This is a very dark room. I have one small window and I have a forest on the back side. There's trees, so no light ever makes it into my bedroom. I have fake plants on top of the bookshelves, fake plants in the corner because nothing will live in here. But we're gonna go ahead and take a look at my books, and hopefully I do not make you guys a little dizzy with the camera. Okay, I have my back to the door and we are looking at this shelf here on the left first, and we're just gonna go from the top down. So this bookshelf here, if you are new to my channel, I actually have a degree in English literature, and so you're going to see a lot of that peppered through my bookshelves. There are some shelves that have a story to them. They have very specific items on them. There are some that are just absolutely a hodgepodge because at this point in time I don't know how to categorize them. They're not really ordered by genre, they're somewhat ordered by genre. Because I love books, I also decorate a lot with books. So throughout this, I will pepper in some photographs from my living room where I also have a rather large stash of books. But this here is predominantly a poetry shelf. So this is where Beowulf lives, my book of medieval English verse. Blake, I do love some Blake. Robert Frost is here as well. I need to revisit my poetry shelf. It's been a little while since I have dabbled down into some poetry. Next to that, I have If We Were Villains, which of course is a fairly new book. I have not yet read it, but it lives here because of its relationship to Shakespeare. And this is my Shakespeare shelf. You can see the glare from those lights I have set up coming in just a little bit. Complete works of Shakespeare, literary criticism about Shakespeare, some fictional works about Shakespeare. This is the Shakespeare shelf. I do have another complete works of Shakespeare in the house. Again, it is in the living room, and I will slip in a picture of that. But I do very much appreciate the Bard, and so this is where I keep my Shakespeare books. Below Shakespeare, I have got Dan Brown. Now, I'm not quite sure where my copy of Angels and Demons or the Da Vinci Code went. I probably loaned them to somebody or just gave them away. I tend to refer to myself as a book dealer. My mother was a librarian. We just love books, and sometimes I give people books that I think they should read and never ask for them back. Next to Dan Brown, we're going to talk about basically my Africa shelf. So again, if you are new here, I was raised in East Africa. I grew up in Kenya. It was an idyllic childhood, and I kind of wish I was there now, but this is mostly that shelf. The book on this shelf that doesn't quite belong, of course, is this one right here, which is Indian folklore retelling. I just wasn't quite sure where else to stick it, so Kaikie lives there right now. And next to that shelf, we have the classics. Out of all of these, my favorite is Dante's Inferno. I'm a very big fan of the Inferno and the Circles of Hell, and it fascinates me. The whole thing does. Below that classics shelf, I have a number of books by Stephen Lawhead, who obviously writes a lot of series. These are the first 3 books and they're out of order. First 3 books in the Pendragon cycle. I actually reread Taliesin this year and have found out that in adulthood, that series is no longer for me. And then I just have another series here. I've actually forgotten what this is. Swords of Albion series. This is the Swords of Albion series. I have not yet read those. I picked them up because they looked cool. And then of course we have the Stardust Thief, which is my book of the month pick from a couple of months ago. Have not yet read that either. Moving over to the right, and this shelf it's a little bit of a hodgepodge, but right now it is heavy on the fantasy. A lot of my books I do take off the dust jackets. I'm not a big fan of keeping the dust jackets around. And then of course next to that we have my copy of the Narnia books. Dropping straight down from there, and hopefully keeping this in frame, I have a couple of Gregory Maguire books. I went through a Gregory Maguire phase. These are the 3 that I read. I don't think I read any more after that. I do very much appreciate Wicked the Musical, but I never felt compelled to need to pick up any Gregory Maguire books after finishing these 3. Next to that, I do have my Harry Potter box set, as well as Quidditch Through the Ages and those sorts of books here. And then next to that is the beginning of what we're going to call my King Arthur situation. Aside from Taliesin, Merlin, and Arthur, I do have an affinity for books that are all things King Arthur. This is the Jack White series, the Skystone series. Yes, I have read these. It's been quite some time ago, but it was very much a take on the Arthurian legend that I appreciated. We are back around on the other side, and this is the shelf of Chaucer. Again, really just brings out the English literature nerd in me that I have this much information about Chaucer. This was actually a textbook, but it was one of those things that was informational enough that I did keep it. So when I went back to university, I did start university in my 20s and did not complete in my 20s. I made a pact to myself that I would finish university by the age of 40, and the date on my conferred degree is my 39th birthday. But when I went back to school, I really thought I was going to get stuck in Elizabethan literature because I do so love it. And I actually got stuck in the Middle Ages and couldn't get back out. So I ended up reading much more about Chaucer than I did Shakespeare. Not expecting myself to love Middle English, I did get to the point where I can actually read Middle English fairly well without any sort of translation. Moving across the top shelf, and this is my Neil Gaiman shelf. Not all my Neil Gaiman books are here. Norse mythology is currently in Kenny's room, and then I also am missing Neverwhere on this shelf, which is out in my living room. Again, I'll pepper in some pictures of the books that I decorate with around my living room. Neverwhere being one of those books that is pretty much always in my top 5 and sometimes my favorite depending on my mood. Next to Neil Gaiman, we do have some modern fiction of the female variety, or chick lit if you want to call it that. I am not the biggest fan of some modern fiction, but I do very much appreciate Cecilia Ahern, who is Irish. I love the tiny mystical elements that she puts into her books. And then this is just sort of a hodgepodge. We do have an Ahern book here, but then this is Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, always a good read for a creator, and some other things that I have just stuck on this shelf because I wasn't quite sure where to put them. Speaking of things I wasn't quite sure where to put, this shelf is kind of a hot mess of a little bit of everything. We've got some Dickens, we've got The Time Traveler's Wife. I mean, there's a lot of things here that are confusing to me. I do love this little book, England. It is this hysterical farce that Julian Barnes has written. We are going to go down and look at the rest of the bookshelves, but first we are going to go up because I do have a few stacked on top. First off, we have Kate Moss's books. I have not yet read these. These are on my TBR, so they have just been hanging out for a little while, waiting for Beth to pick them up. Next to that, we have got the Atlas 6 and Stephen King's Fairy Tale. I have never read a Stephen King novel. His book on writing is one of my favorites, but I have never read one of his tales of fiction, any of them at all. So this is probably going to be my first Stephen King novel. Above that, of course, is Olive Blake and the Atlas 6, which has been all over the internet this year. And I did not appreciate the Atlas 6. I loved the premise. It had so much possibility. I found our 6 main characters generic and boring. The complete antithesis to that is the first part of Robin Hobb's writing. After 20 some odd years of just managing to not get to it as a big fantasy fan, I finally picked up Assassin's Apprentice. I got that read this year, and I intend to finish this trilogy and immediately start binging the rest of her series in this particular world, because her character development is just superb. I just can't even explain why it has taken me so long to get to Robin Hobb, but I'm very much enjoying her now that I'm there. And then next to that, we just have a bunch of fairy tales, because why not have a bunch of fairy tales? The one on top, the one on bottom, very much fairy tales. The one in the middle, Happily Ever After, are fairy tales retold by some very prominent authors, and it is a very enjoyable read. All right, we're gonna head back down to the second level on this bookshelf. Okay, here we are with a little better of a camera angle for me. This obviously is a fantasy section here with Patrick Rothfuss's books. And then I have The Dragon's Path by Daniel Abraham. I have not read The Dagger and the Coin at all. I have no idea what it's about. It's one of those things that I picked up on the bookshelf because I'm a fantasy fan and oh, that looked cool. I haven't read them. Next to that, we have another hodgepodge, though the right side of this is predominantly historical fiction sort of related. So we do have Philippa Gregory on here. I, Elizabeth by Rosalind Miles. Along with being someone who has a degree in English literature, I also get a little bit fascinated with English history. I am quite an Anglophile, and I do love some good historical fiction, and so that's what we have here, along with a little bit of fantasy and some other things. Here to the right, we have my Joe Abercrombie shelf with The Blade Itself. I love this series. This is a fantastic series. I've actually only read the first book. I still need to read the other two, but I have no doubt that they are just as fantastic. Oop, you've fallen over there. As The Blade Itself. I just love his character development. It is a little more, say, grittier fantasy than some others are, but I do very much appreciate Joe Abercrombie. Next to that, I have Harry Turtledove and his alternate reality sort of fiction, like did Atlantis actually exist? I don't have a clue, y'all, whether I like Harry Turtledove or not. I have yet to pick one up. I have not read these books. They continue to live on my shelf like I think I'm going to like Harry Turtledove, and I just have no idea. I have no idea if it's gonna be a read that I appreciate. Next to that, we have another hodgepodge of sort of classic literature, much of it American, some of it English. Obviously, I've got Anne Radcliffe on here for a good Gothic read. Sylvia Plath with The Bell Jar. Sylvia is one of my kindred spirits, as I also live with bipolar disorder. And then there's just Crime and Punishment, pretty much right next to Little Women. That's not any sort of organization my mother, the librarian, would ever be proud of. There you have it. And then next to that, I do have a small selection of Jane Austen. This is sort of just like the paperbacks and one hardback for Pride and Prejudice that have come along here and there over the course of my life. So they just kind of live here. I do have a very beautiful green linen set. Again, I'll pop in a picture. Those are out in my living room on display as well, because I very much appreciate Miss Austen. I came to her in my 30s thinking that she would be too girly for me, and now Persuasion, along with Neverwhere, is always in my top 5 books, and sometimes at the very top, depending on the particular moment or time in my life that it needs to be higher or fall a little lower. Below Jane Austen, I have books about books or libraries or bookstores, and most of those on this shelf are the Invisible Library series, which is a very fun read for me as it has to do with books and fantasy. And it's just one of those series that I love to go to when I need an easy read, and then I definitely wanted the Cartographers. Haven't had time to pick it up yet, but I got that in one of my Book of the Month picks as well. So I did mention that I appreciate some historical fiction, and I have had a number of Bernard Cornwell's books over the years. Some of these series I've actually given to my older brother, so they're no longer on my shelves. It also tags along with my King Arthur problem. As you can see, the Excalibur book is right there with Winter King and Enemy of God. I actually haven't read that series yet. The rest of these books I have read. That one I haven't gotten to. I loaned it to my mother, who's read it and given it back, and I still haven't had time to read it yet. Also on this shelf live my Google Home Mini for my bedroom, as well as my Wi-Fi extender, because you have to stick those things somewhere. Okay, Outlander fans, here we go. I do have the Outlander series. I just picked up Go Tell the Bees That I'm Gone. I didn't buy it last year. I just bought it a couple of months ago, and the reason being is that the television show has now passed me. I started reading the Outlander books way before the television series became a thing. And I adore the first book, the first Outlander book. The second one was okay. The third was meh. The fourth and fifth, I had to slog through. And Diana Gabaldon is verbose, y'all. So if you're not enjoying all of the words that she has written, I do not know if I'm ever going to finish the Outlander series at this point. I'm very torn about it because I love the characters, but I've gotten to the point where I don't necessarily love where they are in their stories. And it made it very difficult for me to read. So I have this whole Diana shelf. We just don't know what we're going to do with it. It's going to sit there for a little bit because it's not high on my TBR. Right next to that is more of my Arthur problem. So as you can see, Lamort Arthur is there on the top. Over on the left is The Mists of Avalon, which I first read as a teenager. Didn't necessarily appreciate it, I think, as much until I went back to university. And it was actually the textbook that I had to read for Modern Epic Fantasy, which was a class. Yes, I got to take a class titled Modern Epic Fantasy. Mists of Avalon was our textbook. Very much appreciate it more now than I did then. It's just a beautiful, fantastic read. Coming down to the bottom, and I have these Michael J. Sullivan books that I've never read. The Reveria Revelations. I'm not even sure if I'm saying that correctly. I would have to look it up. This is another one of those book sets that I bought because it looked cool and I thought I was going to read it. And I will get there eventually. When that's going to happen, I am not quite sure. Next to that, over here, we have another hodgepodgey shelf of random things. So you're sensing a theme here as we go along. And then next to that, we have got the Hunger Games books. To the right of the Hunger Games books, we have got the Asterix comics. And I don't think this is quite all of them. It is very many of them. The Asterix comics is a comic book out of France. It's the story of a little village in Gaul that refuses to be conquered by the Romans, and the main characters are Asterix and Obelix. If you saw my poll for my March bullet journal setup, one of the names of those playlists was Paranoid Vital Statistics. He comes out of this comic book series. This is very much the comic books of my childhood, having grown up overseas. I highly recommend, if you can find Asterix and Obelix comics, that you take a stab at these and read these because they are absolutely delightful and you will fall in love with them. To the right of Asterix, we have another little hodgepodgey selection. Not quite sure why the Poisonwood Bible is upside down. I'm looking at that now. Obviously, it probably fell off the shelf due to the Dots and Beyond felines, Éowyn and Faramir, who, if you've noticed, there is not a Lord of the Rings book on these shelves because it is also out on display in my living room. But Éowyn and Faramir do occasionally wreak some havoc on my lower bookshelves. And then to the right of that, we are going to sort of finish off with the Witcher series. And I have started the Witcher series. Love them. I absolutely love these books. I love these books as much as I love the television show. I've actually never played the game, and so I had asked for the Witcher books for Christmas last year. And we've started them, and I love them so far. And we'll see if I can finish those 5 books or the rest of those 5 books in 2023. So y'all, that is it. That is a wrap up of a very quick bookshelf tour, as well as some photographs of books that I have scattered around the house. This is a very different style video for me. I'm still not on camera. Someday, I'm getting closer and closer to being a non-faceless YouTube channel. I'm just not quite there yet. It's not something I'm comfortable doing. I'm a very outgoing individual. I just don't like to be on camera, but maybe one day, if you guys encourage me enough, I'll actually show up on camera. So stay tuned for, during this Planmas, the tour of my little creative corner and where I do my filming and my artwork, and that is coming soon. So if you enjoyed this little peek into my bookshelves, give this video a big thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will catch you in the next one.